Welcome to the Instant Impact Podcast. I'm your host, Elise Archer, and I think this episode is so relevant for where we are in the world right now and what we are all being called to do, which is to adapt. And I know you may be sick of hearing about it. You may be sick of thinking about it at this point, but I tell you what, I really think that we are at the beginning of a massive global shift in terms of how we relate to each other, how we do business. And if we are resistant to adapting now, well, guess what? It's not the type of thing that you get to just brush under the rug and keep moving on. If you are being called to adapt your mindset, your business model, your brand, your relationships, then that's not going to go away until you do. And I know adapting and changing can be hard. And it's something that I personally have had to really work on over the years, just getting more flexible with stuff. And I remember, this is like embarrassing, but a while back, one of my clients ran a personality assessment on me, and that's always a little bit just weird when your clients do that, but they did, and I was afraid to see what came out. And there's a lot of good stuff, but one of the things that also came out was that I was very high on what's called the rigidity scale, which meant that you do not like to adapt and change. And at first I thought, well, that's not me. I love change. I love new things. And then I thought about, you know what, actually, I know that there have been plenty of times in my life where I've been called to switch something up, to release something that's no longer working for me, to be open to doing things a new way. And I've had so much resistance around it because I didn't know what was on the other side. And I was comfortable with the way I was doing stuff. And so that really opened my eyes to how in nature, things change and move so fast, and there's natural pivots that occur. And when we can adopt that same mindset into our own lives and start to look at being flexible and knowing how to adapt ourselves as a real skill set, things can transform in our lives. And this is something I've been talking about a lot on my social media lately, because it was a real eye-opener for me over the past several years, is when there's something that used to work for you, whether it's in, let's just say in your business for the sake of this conversation, maybe it's a revenue stream, maybe it's a marketing strategy, but there's something that used to work for you and it no longer works. It's like all of a sudden the faucet just turns off. Oftentimes what that is an invitation from God, source, universe, to do things a different way and to rise up and to level up. And I have had multiple times in my career and in my life happen like that, where I was on it felt like a strong trajectory. I was doing business a certain way. Things were going great. Money was rolling in, clients were rolling in. And then there wasn't anything that I changed in my model, but suddenly it was like, boom, the faucet just turned off. And when that happened the first time, I went into panic mode. And I remember thinking, what is wrong with me? There's got to be something wrong. And I started studying like my closing techniques and my prospecting and all of this. And not that there's not value to doing that and having an exploration when the faucet turns off for you. But what I ended up realizing was I was actually being asked to make a major pivot in my business and in my life, which I ended up doing. And then it's like things turn back on. So when we're being called to adapt, we can feel a lot of resistance to it. But I want to invite you to really see it as an opportunity to up-level and to ask, what's the new level of consciousness? What's the new business model? What's the new brand that I am being called to bring into this world? Because holding on to what used to work is not going to work for you. So with that being said, my guest today on the podcast is someone who's a real expert in adaptability. And his name, man, I had to say, Dr. Yishai, please tell me how to pronounce your last name correctly. So I have Dr. Yishai Barkhordari on the podcast with me today, and he's a psychologist. He's an executive coach. He helps leaders of multi-million-dollar companies learn how to increase performance, react powerfully, create win-win solutions. And he has this concept he calls adaptability hacking, where he teaches people how to become more adaptable and how to turn what they feel like their weaknesses are into their greatest strengths. And I thought, gosh, there's really nothing more relevant. Well, look, there's a lot of things that are relevant right now, but this is a very relevant conversation for a lot of us, to be looking at how can we adapt? How can we become more flexible? How can we be resilient through that change and through just changing tides of business and life? So I loved this conversation. I learned so much from Dr. Yishai, and I think you are going to do that as well. So really, really excited to welcome Dr. Yishai to the Instant Impact Podcast. Dr. Yishai, I am so excited for this conversation. And, like I was talking about in the intro, I think part of why this is so relevant is that right now, more than ever, as you and I record this, it's July of 2020. I think each of us is feeling called to adapt in some way, whether it's adapting our mindset, whether it's adapting the way that we do business, our brand, maybe it's our revenue model as well. We're having to shift and pivot and change in the moment. And so to have an expert like you who can come on and talk about adaptability and how do we thrive while we adapt it's something that I think is going to benefit me, I know personally, and then also our listeners. So thank you so much for coming on and joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to talk about it. Talking about adaptability and how to adapt is like my jam. I just love talking about it. I get all revved up about it.
I love it. Well, I'm kind of curious too, just personally, how you got into this work. I mean, it's not every day I meet someone who's really, really focused on a topic as specific as adaptability. And so tell us a little bit about how you became passionate about this and how this became an area of expertise for you.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I can go all the way back to childhood. It's like the psychologist in me coming out. So one thing that I realized when I was much younger is that I had really big, sometimes uncontrollable or even explosive reactions. Mm-hmm. And it showed up in ways that I did not anticipate, that I certainly didn't want, that were not easy, and that really got in the way of a lot of things for me. And, when that was happening, I tried so hard, and it was so important to me to try to find ways of dealing with it or addressing it. And don't get me wrong, I failed multiple times. It was just a lifelong kind of journey. And it took well over 2.5 decades. It took about 25 years for me to finally really make sense of it and get a good grasp on handling it. So in a really macro sense, it was about me needing to get a handle on the things that for me really got in the way of being as adaptable as I want and need to. And, I could talk more about my journey. I'd love to, into my teenage years and into kind of high school and deciding college and all of that. In the kind of short version of it is that it really got me interested and really invested in psychology for myself and for others, and really helped me develop this mission that I have, which is to help us all really understand and increase our adaptability and become just as adaptable as we could ever possibly even imagine.
So it's interesting when you say that, because I think, some people are going to immediately be able to relate and say, I've struggled with that too, or I know sometimes, my temper gets the best of me, or I can go from 0 to 100 really fast. And then other people may feel like, well, I don't know if I've ever really struggled with that. And you and I in the pre-chat were talking about, sometimes for men, the word reaction may resonate with them more. Sometimes for women, it may be more feelings or intuition. So if someone's listening, they're like, I don't know that I struggle at all with, reactions that feel out of control. Can you give us some context for maybe some examples or other places where that may be showing up, and then how it can hold us back?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you've ever had a moment where you're experiencing something and it's uncomfortable and you're trying not to let yourself have it or feel it. So if you've ever felt asking yourself, in my body, have I ever felt something that I was really struggling with? And it was like in response to something going on around me or something in my life or something that was coming up or that is happening in the moment, right? It's many of us, we actually learn. And in fact, we often kind of train ourselves to tune out or to distract from those things. So if you've ever felt like you were getting a little bit overloaded and you pick up your phone and you start to scroll on social media, or if you've ever been in an interaction or in a conversation and something gets said and you have this moment of like, oh, I really like that. And you're trying to like stay in that interaction and not pay attention to what you're saying, what you're experiencing in your body and your brain, right? And that could be a reaction, it could be a feeling, it could be an emotion. What happens is that those sensations that are happening in your body, they're actually your brain making your body experience something, creating a reaction in your body so that it will draw your attention to something that's important to you for a reason. And most of the time, if you can relate to any of those things, and in the moment you kind of held yourself back and didn't pause and say, what am I not okay with? Or what is difficult? Or what is it that is happening in my environment or inside of me that really needs to get addressed? Well, then it's not going to get addressed. And if it's not getting addressed, or it's kind of like it's a bit of a gamble, like, are you going to accidentally address it or draw your attention to it later in a different kind of way? But if it doesn't get addressed, then whatever the source is that you're having that experience, it's not going to be resolved or figured out. So an example that I kind of started with is if you feel like you're getting overloaded, there are too many things on your plate, you're trying to pick up new projects, or you're trying to kind of create a new stream of income, or try to, open up a new or start and get much more involved in your brand in another, social media. When you're picking those things up, if you notice that you're starting to feel overloaded, but you're not paying attention to it, and you just keep trying to push yourself, well, what you're not doing is slowing down, taking stock of what is happening and why that's occurring. And so what you're not likely to do is to strategize or take a break. You're not likely to think about, okay, how do I really handle this? Or how do I set myself up strategically? What's likely to happen is you throw yourself harder into it, maybe in a not so effective way, or you end up distracting yourself to avoid feeling that way and then not getting very much done. And neither of those reactions, neither of those responses to that reaction, or neither of those behaviors are going to really get you to address the thing you want. It's not getting you closer to your goal. It's not getting you closer to your dream. It's not getting you what you need. And that's the core of it. The core of it is that whenever you're having that moment and that experience physically in your body or in your brain, that mental experience, whatever that thought is, it is trying to draw your attention. And it isn't always great at it. That's why we don't like it. It can be incredibly uncomfortable. It can be downright miserable. Anybody who's experienced exhaustion or anxiety, or I don't mean like clinical anxiety, I mean like, being worried or really nervous, or feeling stuck or overwhelmed, we know that it's so uncomfortable. We just want the discomfort to go away. Yeah. But that's when we're actually not paying attention to the reason that reaction is showing up or that feeling is showing up. It comes from somewhere. It's actually generated in my brain in response to something to try to get me to respond to it or adapt to it, adapt myself or adapt my environment.
It's so interesting as you say that, because I think one of the things, especially in Western culture, is that we're taught that our feelings don't really matter. And we're taught to ignore our feelings and suppress our feelings. And I struggled with that for so many years. And it's something I'm still learning to do, is actually like when I get a negative feeling about something, honor it instead of pushing through. And you talk about like the overwhelm and feeling anxious. And I can't tell you how many years of my life on Sundays I would deal with just extreme anxiety, overwhelm. I had this like paradigm where I thought, if I could just get everything done on my to-do list from this past week by Sunday, then going into the week, it'll be a clean slate. I'll be able to accomplish my goals. And it never happened because I was just being unreasonable with myself about what was possible. But it created this cycle of just overwhelm. And I just,
Mm-hmm.
I think my brain got conditioned that that's okay. And that's how it's meant to be.
Mm.
And so what I'm hearing you say, and I want you to let me know if I'm on the right track here, is that um, those are signals, and we do not have to feel that way necessarily. It's like if we pay attention to that signal and look at what is it telling us and find the truth behind it, then we can sort through it and have a different experience the next time. So is that what you're saying? It's like pay attention to those feelings and dig into them, because it doesn't actually have to be that way.
Yeah, exactly. And I would even say further, not just for next time, but this time, in the
Mm.
moment that it's happening. So I'll share with you. I've experienced and worked with people talking about overwhelm so much that it's like a subspecialty of mine. I mean, all of these reactions, all of these feelings are things that I've spent so much time understanding. So I'll give you, I actually have a formula. I'm going to get a little nerdy on you. I have a
I love a
formula for
formula.
overwhelm,
Ooh,
right?
give it to us. Yeah.
And for those of you who are not watching video, I'm going to be using my hands, so I'll be describing it a little bit. But so an overwhelm tells me that my load is greater. My hands are really far apart, right? My load is very big, and my limits or my capacity is actually small. It's not big enough to hold all of my load. So
Mm.
overwhelm equals load over limit, where my load is great, it's greater than my limit or my capacity, my abilities to handle it. That's what overwhelm means. That's when it shows up. And what it does is it starts to signal to me that I'm redlining, that
Mm.
pressure is building up, that there's so much more load than I could handle with my limits, with the way that I am, with how I am understanding and addressing and working both with myself and with my life, that if it continues, the load can get so much greater. It can crush me. That kind of pressure can build so great that it can really do damage to me. And so the overwhelm is actually the messenger. Like you're saying, it's the signal. It's not the problem. It's
Mm.
telling you that there is a problem. Now, when I work with entrepreneurs and business leaders, what I help them understand is, because overwhelm equals load over limit, there are two things that are really important and useful to do. One is to manage your load, learning to understand and recognize what load is too much, and too much in a way that's overwhelming, and what can I handle, right? So there's a lot of different ways of approaching that. You can prioritize, you can schedule, you can offload things, whether that's to other people, or you can kick them to a later time. Maybe it's next week, maybe it's next month, maybe it's next year, or maybe it's never.
Mm.
Right? Just like totally get it off your plate, right? So one part of it, a huge part of it, and is usually the more urgent part when we're experiencing overwhelm, is really dealing with that load. Because if we don't deal with that load, that's going to be a real massive problem. That's the thing that's going to crush us. The other part, which is secretly the more important part and the consistent work to do, which is so important to show up and address, is my limits. How do I expand my limits? So this is the other set of things that I work on when I work with entrepreneurs and business leaders, is how to expand your limits in a way that allows you to take on more load, take on more load, take on more load, and not get crushed by it. And there's so much stuff you can do, developing and building skills, automating systems, hiring, right? These are all some of the ways. And there's so many other ways. And of course, different people and their situations are going to be different. So the specific strategies are going to be different. And that's the work that I do. I dive right into it with them. And the thing is, when you listen to that, when you pay attention to the signal, then you can, and when you understand this is the signal it's telling me, and there are more than 30 emotions depending on who you ask and the model that you subscribe to. In my experience, there are at least 30 emotions, if not more. When you know every one of them and the signal it's sending and why it's sending that, your adaptability goes absolutely through the roof. No matter what shows up in your life, you have this system. Your emotion system is called your limbic system in your brain. It's designed to filter everything all the information that you're getting, and direct you to pay attention to the things that are most important so that you can adapt. We are, as a species, the most incredibly adaptable species on the planet, and that we know in all of history, right? I mean, there might be other ones out there. I don't know. That isn't my realm. My realm is kind of humans and our brain and how we work. But there's something that's so important. When you really understand it, overwhelm is not a problem. it's a messenger, so don't shoot the messenger. And also, when you really deeply understand why and when and how it's showing up, you also know and can learn how to respond to it, how to show up, how to let it come in, and how to harness it. And the thing about that is, like, I get excited when I'm overwhelmed now, because it tells me something. It tells me, hey, I've got a lot of load and I need to manage that.
Mm.
The more important thing it tells me is it lets me seek expansion of my limits. And since I've been doing that work, both with myself and my clients, what happens when you're constantly expanding your limits is your ability to carry load just continues to get bigger. What that means is your growth and your scaling, your ability to handle more things just continues to explode.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And I love how simple it is. And the other thing that shows up for me is there's perhaps a bit of a self-worth conversation too, because I think for many of us, at least thinking about my own experience in the past, when I have felt overwhelmed, sometimes it's like, well, I'm just not doing it well enough, or the story of not enough or not good enough, or I should be able to handle this. And we can kind of get stuck in that story and just replay that. And that's not really productive, because if you can learn to identify it the way that you're saying it, which is just thinking about load over limits, it's like, okay, what's the solution? It's much more solution oriented, giving yourself permission to say either I need to reduce my load or I need to expand my limits, most likely both. But rather than beating yourself up about it, saying what's a productive solution here? So I like how clear that is. And I'm curious too, your take on this. So you've talked about like when you feel those feelings of stress, or maybe you're in a conversation with somebody and they say something that triggers you, using that real time information to look at what's going on. So kind of speaking tactically here, would you recommend, are we supposed to like stop in the moment and analyze and say, what's this telling me? Or do you have your clients go and like, after the fact, reflect on what showed up for them and journal about it? Like how do we actually implement this in our lives?
Yeah, it's a great question. I really love that question. And the way I approach it is it's a skill. And like any skill, including when we're all very, very young and starting to learn to walk, we start by wobbling and falling and trying and trying. And it's not necessarily going to start happening in the moment. It's helpful if you are able to kind of pause and ask yourself in the moment, wait, what's going on? We don't always have that luxury for a lot of different reasons. Sometimes we don't have the presence of mind, or we're not necessarily as aware as it's happening in the moment. And, I think like you were saying before, and I may have also been saying, is that we learn so much to ignore and distract and get away from what we're feeling, that being in touch with it in the moment is really hard. Sometimes it can feel downright unbearable. And so, in the work that I do, sometimes it's about building that skill by acknowledging and recognizing, like the kid or infant who's learning how to walk or talk, is that it's going to take a lot of effort, especially at first, and it's going to be a lot of intention. It's going to take a lot more energy than it will later. And that with the right guidance, you can absolutely learn to do that and be able to do that much more in the moment. And that it's going to start more likely with afterwards realizing, oh, I was having that reaction. Or an alternative to that is sometimes we ignore it and we ignore it. But the thing is, because your feelings, your emotions have a purpose, they don't just give up. It's like if your house is on fire and the firefighters come and they knock on the door, right, and nobody answers, are they just going to be like, okay, I guess there's nobody there, right? We're being ignored. Goodbye, right? They don't do that because they need to save you, right? And so they'll bust the door down, which is the same thing that our feelings and our emotions do, is they push harder and they will bust the door down on us if we are not tuned in or paying attention. So the more you learn to tune in and pay attention, even if it's afterwards at first, the more you will be able to have that recognition more in the moment instead of just ignoring it or deflecting or distracting. Yeah. And the more you're able to do that, the more adaptable you will be in the moment for what's happening.
Yeah. Gosh, it's such a good conversation. I think it's so timely right now. One of the things I've just been talking with my friends about and clients about, and you probably have a take on this, but when I look at a lot of what this year has been about, it seems like everything that has been suppressed, everything that was a change that needed to be made, everything that's been kind of like boiling under the surface, whether it's on a macro level globally or on a personal level, is coming out. It's just like stuff is like, people I know who've been in really long-term relationships are getting divorced. Like I've had these health issues that have cropped up this year that I apparently have been here for a long time and I didn't know. Which is, it's like, and then on a global level, we look at, we just look at what's happening and some of the things that are rising to the surface. And so I think for a lot of us, it's like we may have been able to suppress stuff for so long, but now it's coming up and it's gonna be dealt. And for someone whose default mode, we were talking in the pre-chat about a lot of default mode for us when things get uncomfortable is like, hop on social media, scroll Instagram. If that's your default mode and it's become a habit and it's kind of ingrained in you to tune out, or maybe, someone is turning to alcohol or they're turning to just some sort of distraction, it can feel hard to break that habit. How do we start to break that habit that has been our release for so long and start to learn to actually tune into the emotions? How do we get past that initial hump of the discomfort?
It's a great question. The first thing I would say is recruiting help, because it's much harder to do on our own. And we get a lot more support and we get a lot more growth in those relationships. So, I think I would first of all be remiss if I didn't say that seeking a therapist can be incredibly useful and helpful, especially if you or somebody is really struggling with substance use, or if they are avoiding in such a way that is harmful, if the way that they're distracting or avoiding is directly harming themselves or someone else, right? It's really important to be able to get that kind of help. I think if it's not at the level that's kind of like clinical, where you need to see a psychologist or a therapist, and it's below that threshold, then it's something that is absolutely worthwhile to get a coach, someone who can help you be directed, who can help you tune into what's going on, right? I know different coaches work different ways, and it's really important to be selective for yourself based on what your needs are and to make sure that the match is good. And that's as true for therapists as it is for coaches and anything else. If it's not a great match, then you're not going to be getting what it is that you need. I have a tendency to be a little bit more cautious about coaching, but that's also because I'm more in the psychology arena and realm when it comes to being a psychologist. On the other hand, coaching can have tremendous benefits. Historically, when it showed up and as it showed up and expanded to so many different areas, coaching was all about sports, and the sports was about getting external feedback. And what that really reminds me of is, I don't know if you've heard of Tasha Eurich and her book Insight. She talks about two different kinds of insight. One is internal, which is me knowing what I'm experiencing internally. And that's part of what we're talking about. That's really important. And that's cultivating that. It's really useful to be able to have relationships in which I can talk about myself and what I'm feeling. And there's space just to be listened or heard, to be listened to or heard. The other side of that, which is equally important and equally useful and different as a skill, is getting feedback from others about how I'm experienced by them or by others. And so it's really important to be able to put into place for yourself these supports. Maybe they're friendships, maybe they're mentors, maybe they're coaches, maybe they're psychologists or therapists, and whatever they are, however it is, being able to have that space and the relationship or the support, whatever that looks like for you, is really, really important. Or maybe, for example, it doesn't look like any of those things. And what you do is you carve out in your morning 20 minutes or 30 minutes. And if you really want to start small, it can be as little as 2 minutes or 5 minutes. And you write about what you're experiencing. Or maybe during the day, you set up some alarms, and like 3, 4, 5 times a day, the alarm reminds you, hey, check in. How am I feeling in my body? What am I experiencing? When was the last time I may have had a reaction? Am I paying attention to that? Hey, are you scrolling right now? If you're scrolling, what are you paying attention or not paying attention to, right? The very important question is, what are you not paying attention to? What's the reason for that if you're distracting yourself, right? If you happen to be a serial distractor, then start when you check in, ask yourself, what am I distracting myself from? What am I struggling with? What am I not having an easy time with that I'm feeling really uncomfortable and I'm trying not to feel or not to really states. And those are all different ways that you can start to cultivate those things. I mean, there's so many different ways of doing it. It's kind of hard for me to just like, spill out a bunch of strategies because different things work for different people. And from my perspective, there's an almost unlimited number of strategies as long as you're seeking that goal or trying to get that need met or responding to and learning and trying to grow. There's so many different ways to do that. And it's kind of hard to say like, okay, here are the 6 ways that you can do that, because it almost in an unintentional way might eliminate other ways. So I'd also encourage, your listeners and everyone to think about ways that are easy to integrate into my life, that are easy to put into my life, to start doing that more often.
Yeah. Well, and I just think it's such an important conversation too, because it sounds like the common denominator with all of it is just creating the space to actually face it head on. And I know how hard that is. And I've shared this with my audience. Like I struggled for 17 years with an eating disorder from my early teens up through, about age 30. And I managed it, but it was always there, kind of underlying. And it was something I was so ashamed of, because I was on the outside, I was high performing. I, had a great business, all this, but deep down, I was still really struggling with this. And the only thing that finally broke it was actually hiring a coach and saying, I need someone who can really help me with this. And it was almost in that moment of just bringing it to light and admitting that it was something I was struggling with, where it started to kind of release the hold. But that wouldn't have happened if I just kept suppressing and suppressing and suppressing. And so whether it's like you talked about, getting a therapist, a coach, or even just being willing to sit for 2 minutes with it and journal about it, it loses its power. And I think it's really, really important for us to know how to do that. And so I appreciate you sharing that. This is so good. And I feel like I could probably talk to you for hours about this. So I appreciate everything you've shared. Any final tips or words of wisdom in terms of adaptability for someone right now who's looking at, I've got to, based upon what's happening in the world and my life, like I need to adapt. Let's say it's their business and they're like, I've got to adapt my brand. I've got to adapt my business model. And they're, or it could be personal too, but they're maybe clinging to what they know and what they're used to, and they're afraid of making that pivot or that change. Any final words of wisdom, Dr. Yishai, for someone who wants to become more adaptable, wants to become more resilient, but is maybe struggling with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll actually give you an exercise that you can do. And I happen to love, I think one of the most powerful sets of tools we have are a pencil and a paper. And nowadays, if you're happy to use a Word document, you can use a Word document or other kind of online document, your phone even. What I would say is adaptability has 3 core components: data, direction, and drive. You need all 3 of those in order to adapt. Without data, you have no idea what it is to respond to, what it is that's problematic, or what it is that needs to change. The first thing you need is data that something isn't working right or needs to change. That's what the data is. So on your piece of paper, right, divide it into 3 sections. And on the first section, put the data. So write data and then talk about all the things that aren't working, all the things that need to change. Put all of those things in that section. And then in the second section, you need direction. Do you move towards or away? Do you go right or go left? Which way are you going to turn or pivot? You need direction. You kind of need a GPS. You can start with some goals, some kind of end results in mind. The important thing is to ask yourself, which way do I direct my feet, my actions, my time in order to get to where I want to go? So without direction, even if you have all the data, if you don't have a direction, or the direction's 180 degrees, the reverse, then you're going to put in lots of effort. You're going to get nowhere, or worse, you're going to dig the hole deeper. So that's the second thing you really need. So in that section, the second section, write all the stuff that you can about direction, what you want to move towards, your goals, thinking about ways of making it measurable so you can continue to get more data as you do that. And also setting yourself kind of time frames so you can start to push yourself or make it clear whether or not you're hitting those benchmarks, times that you're taking a look at that. So really setting your direction is the second important thing about adapting or adaptation. The third is drive. If we don't have any motivation, guess what we're getting done? Very little, if anything, right?
Nada.
So the third thing is really need to tap into and understand what your drive is. And one of the most powerful ways to do that is to really be connected to what's important to you, to what you feel is necessary, to what is meaningful to you, to what fulfillment or success look like, all of these things. And so in that kind of last piece, I would say write down what you're excited about, a future, right? You can do vision board. You can put it in a journal. You can make a list of all your goals. You can pick a time in the future and a success or a place that you're at and just journal out all the details, whatever it is. Tapping into that drive is about not just in the direction, knowing which way to turn your feet, but really connecting to why I care, why something is important to me, that it's important to me, that it's necessary, that I can't or won't live without it, right? Staying in touch with that is going to continue to give you that drive. Without the drive, forget it. There's no gas in the car. It doesn't matter how hard you hit on the gas if there's just no fuel in there.
Wow. And it helps us get excited again about what's next and realize that we can make the next thing even better than the last. And I think that's always when we're being called to adapt and called to change, it's because there's something better for us and we don't know it yet. We don't see it yet, but I love how you're helping us attach to our vision there and think about what's possible and what could be next. So this was so helpful for me. I learned so much. So thank you. And I know for everyone listening as well, that it was for them too. And it's such a relevant, timely message. So I want to just say thank you so much for your wisdom, for what you shared. Tell us, Dr. Yishai, where can people connect with you? Where can they get more resources? Because I know they're going to want to reach out and find out more about you and your work.
Yeah. So I'm in a few different places. The best place probably through my website, dryishai.com. And over there, one thing I'm going to do for you and for your guests is I'm actually going to make a landing page. So it'll be Dr. Yishai/Instant Impact. And so in there, I'll put a worksheet for adaptation, like we were just talking about, and I'll put in a worksheet also for overwhelm. So those two things are going to be available for your audience. And so you can go there to get that. Another place is, because I know how much we tend to distract ourselves by scrolling, I actually put myself on Instagram and I've got a lot of content up there. So while you're scrolling, if you want to look me up, see it, it'll give you a kind of bite-sized, quick way of kind of thinking about your reactions and how to be adaptable, depending on what's going on for you. So, you're welcome to kind of scroll through. There's just tons of stuff there. The last few weeks, I've been talking about business paralysis, overwhelm, anxiety. I mean, I have 3 or 4 or 5 more kind of series coming up. They're 2-week series at a time. So we dive deep into those things. So that's another place that if you want to learn more, get more, or connect, you're absolutely welcome to, DM me through Instagram. I'm also on LinkedIn. You can DM me through there as well. You can message me through there, or of course through the website.
Thank you. Well, and this is your page is something that's actually worth scrolling through. And if you're going to tune out, if you're going to do the scroll, go to Dr. Yishai's page because you're going to get something out of it. It's going to help you. So I just, again, thank you so much. It's been really, really fun for me to get to know you better. And you've helped me think differently about my emotions and my reactions and how I can be more adaptable, both now and in the future as well. So I just want to, again, acknowledge you and say thank you for coming on and generously sharing your time and your wisdom today. This has been great.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me here. It's been such a blast talking about it. I am just so passionate about it. I can't stop myself when I get going.
That's how you know when you're living in your zone of genius, right? That is how you know you're doing the thing you're meant to do. So
thank you so much for inviting and having me here.
Yeah, my pleasure, my absolute pleasure. All right, everyone. Well, go connect with Dr. Yishai. Thank you so much for tuning into the podcast today. And I will see you all soon on the next episode. Bye for now.